Hello and welcome to Chicago State University's Black Media and Entertainment Industry Conference. This four-day event is sponsored by the Department of Communications, Media Arts, and Theater here at Chicago State University. For access to the conference program, please go to csu.edu/CMAT. That's C-M-A-T, and click on events. Also, CSU is really happy to announce that we're going to have a full schedule of face-to-face classes in the fall. So if you're interested in attending those, you can go to csu.edu for information about registration and scholarships. I am Jerrell L. Henderson, Professor of Performance Studies in the Theater Department within the larger Department of Communications, Media Arts, and Theater at Chicago State, which we refer to lovingly as CMAT. I'm pleased to be here today with Chris Hedges, our wonderful journalist, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and the playwright, actor, activist, Boris Franklin. Hello and welcome to both of you today. How are you both doing? We'll start with Boris, we'll move to Chris.
I'm doing well. Glad to be here this morning. For the second time.
Yeah, Boris and Chris are on East Coast time and we're on Central time. And so it's always a game of, wait, what time was that? Wonderful. Chris, how are you holding up today?
I'm good. Thanks for having us.
Oh my goodness, I could not be more happy and excited to have you. So full disclosure for the audience, I already have a personal professional relationship with both Chris and Boris. Chris taught and developed the class that Boris would take, which would lead to the play Caged, an original play by inmates and former inmates in the New Jersey prison system that I would end up directing in Trenton, New Jersey. So these are folks that I've worked with, that I've eaten with. They've seen me cry, you know, we've got a pretty good relationship going on. And this is also a chance to say thank you to Chris, who had Boris and I on his show when I was directing the play in New Jersey. You want to go ahead and plug your show, Chris?
Sure, that's a show on RT America called On Contact, which you can see on YouTube.
All right, so let's start from the beginning of Caged. Caged is an original theatrical play that was written in the New Jersey prison industry, written in New Jersey prison industry, and ended up on stage at Passage Theater in Trenton, New Jersey. So Chris, as the teacher of that class, I wonder if you can speak a little bit about just the genesis of how that class began and how it ended with a play.
It was accidental. So I was teaching drama. August Wilson, I taught Dutchman, Leroy Jones, later Amiri Baraka, Baldwin, Panero, the brother-sister plays, etc. And most people in the classroom, I had 28 students, Boris was one of them, didn't have a lot of familiarity with drama. And so I thought that getting them to write dramatic dialogue would be a way to help them become familiar with the form, with dramatic form and dramatic structure. And it was just almost a whim. I mean, I didn't give it any thought. I think it sort of occurred to me when I realized that a lot of people in the classroom hadn't seen plays or read plays. So we had a wonderful student named Kabir. Kabir in Arabic means big, and this guy's big. But he had heard me on WBAI, which is the Pacifica station in New York, which you can get in the prison. So he told Boris and a bunch of other very talented writers in the prison that I was doing this class, and they showed up. I remember Doris can say he wasn't terribly impressed when I walked into the classroom that first day. And so when I got the scenes, I had Boris, student named Sincere, Lawrence Bell. I had some really strong writers. And after 2 or 3 weeks of this, I showed them to my wife, who's an actor, went to Juilliard, and said, I should help them write a play. So we just stumbled into it accidentally. but it ended up becoming immensely powerful because in the end, that play, everything in that play happened to someone in that classroom. I mean, stuff you wouldn't even believe. I mean, a student who gets sent to Trenton State Prison and is put in the cell that his father used to have. I mean, it's almost beyond, you'd think that, that kind of stuff would be fictional. And so I began to work with the students to use those scenes to put together their own play, which became Caged. There was a reticence at the beginning. I remember asking who wanted parts. Only 7 people out of 28 wanted parts. And as the process developed, so you had people writing these incredibly emotional scenes about either their life in prison or before prison, I mean, sometimes it was so emotional they couldn't read it. And that ended up being, again, accidentally, this very cathartic experience because, and Boris can speak to this better than I can, but you really wall yourself off in a prison. People know very little about you. They don't even often know your legal name. And suddenly people began sharing things that they'd never shared in public. So it was an incredibly powerful process. But I think part of the secret was that it wasn't planned. It was completely organic. And we ended up at the end of the semester, I added another, I was writing a book. I dropped the book and just because I was coming home with these piles and I was the editor. I was everything that I edited, and sometimes I would meld scenes together, but then I would go back and clear it with the class. They were the final arbiter of what was in the play. And in the end, we couldn't perform it in the prison. One, they wouldn't allow me in on a daily basis for 3 or 4 weeks to prepare a production. But number 2, there was material in there that if it was read in front of the guards and the administrators would see the prison carry out retribution against my students. Yeah. So I invited Cornel West, who's a friend of mine, and James Cone, who I'm very close to, who we lost a couple of years ago now, the father of Black liberation theology.
The week that we were opening.
Was it? Wow.
Yeah.
It was during tech for Cage, so he didn't live to see Cage.
James came and sat through the readings, though.
Yep.
And he knew the play well. So I invited them to come in and be our audience, and the class was ecstatic, of course. I mean, here are 2 of the intellectual titans of the United States, white or black. I mean, and then when we got there, it's classic prison. I get to the lobby and the administrator or the warden is standing there and said, "You're not going to your classroom. And you're going to the chapel." Well, so I'm taken to the chapel with Cornel and James, and in the chapel, there's literally a wall of corrections officers. I may have this wrong, but I don't think any of them were of color. Certainly the vast majority were white, a great deal of hostility. And then my class was brought in and they saw, they read the scene very quickly and they knew that there were parts of the play they couldn't read. So they gathered in a kind of huddle to decide what parts they would read and what parts they wouldn't. And at that moment, I desperately wanted to hear what they were saying, but I consciously, or I purposely removed myself to the back of the room because I thought it's their play. Even though I wouldn't have said anything, I said it's theirs, they own it. And it was incredibly powerful, because people were reading, although it was the play, they were reading scenes from their own life. One of the students, he broke down. I mean, it was an incredibly powerful experience. And then Boris was the catalyst. He was the first student to get out, and we worked for, 3 years, I think, Boris, because we had, by the end, everybody wanted a part. So we had 28 parts. Yeah, that was moving. Everyone wanted a part by the end. So we had 28 parts, which was ridiculous. So I worked with Boris and a theater director in New York named Jeff Wise and Eunice to essentially make the play so that it would work on stage. And Boris was, key to that, especially in the front part of the play where we drew a lot from his own family. And I just tell one funny story and then Boris talks. So I'd be typing on the computer and Boris would be working on the dialogue. And at one point he said, "Okay, we're going ballin'." Well, I had never heard the word ballin'. A week before, I think I just learned what baby mama was. And And so I wrote bowling. We're going bowling. I'm thinking in my head, wow,
Oh,
black people in the hood went
wow.
bowling. I don't know. But that ended up becoming a whole.
It was a subplot. Bowling was
It was only because of my illiteracy. And it ended up becoming kind of really moving part of the play where the younger son wants to be a bowler. And we found the one black professional bowler who we reference in the play. But I've talked too much. I'll let Boris.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you for giving us a little bit of a foundation. And I am going to go into the plot of Cage because I know that some folks are like, well, what is the play about?
Right.
You know right now that it's about the prison industrial complex. You know right now that it's about the experience of those who have been living as inmates within the system. And once I check it with Boris, I just want to give a kind of a foundation of how it all began. Because the play, like Chris said, was a very organic process. And the thing that it became is not how it necessarily began. And so right now, I just kind of want to get a foundation of the beginnings, and then we can talk about what the play became and what that now means, if that makes sense. So just stick with us. So Boris, can you talk about your experience, you know, just a little bit about that, the day that Chris Hedges walks in and you have, you know, this kind of, he's like older white gentleman who's going to talk to you about these Black playwrights. I know he said August Wilson. We talked a lot about Terrell McCraney in the workshops. We talked a lot about Amiri Baraka, God rest his soul, in those workshops. So yeah, what was it like for you? Had you engaged with theater prior to, or was this your first time? And when did, if you didn't buy what Chris was selling on the first day, when did you start buying it, Boris?
Okay, so first I'll start with, you know, my first introduction to theater, and then my introduction to what Chris was selling. Okay, so my first introduction to theater came from a woman named Miss Toffel. She was my 8th grade teacher. And what had initially happened was I sort of dropped out in the 8th grade because me and this teacher got into this dispute, you know, and I was young and I was like, I'm not going anymore, as early as the 8th grade. And Miss Toffel was my actual teacher. And my mother wouldn't take me out of her class, she said, because she's the first teacher to challenge me. And, you know, and she not only challenged me, she actually broke me. Okay. But at the end of the day, she took me to a play. She took the class to a play. She hated the curriculum. So she came in, she gave us all the books on the first day. She went through the complete curriculum in the first marking period and said, now here's my curriculum. And it was a shock to the system in the 8th grade because we weren't used to having that much work or being challenged in that way. So we read things like The Good Earth, Pearl, and then she took us to see The Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote. Yeah. And that was my introduction into theater. And I thought it was an amazing.
Oh, I wonder if we just lost Boris. Can you still hear me, Chris?
I can.
Okay, great. So we'll wait for Boris's connection to come in, and we know that he's in a public space right now in Zoom.
There he is.
Oh, are you back, Boris? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, I got
okay, you dropped out for a little bit and your picture's frozen, but we can still hear you. So the last thing we spoke about was Man of La Mancha, the musical, changing your life.
Yeah. So it was my first introduction into that magical world of theater where anything might be possible. But I was always a dreamer, a thinker, and a writer because I was a rapper. So I employed words differently. You know, if you want to talk about, you know, the inside of the car look like the beach, water and sand, that would be blue and tan, right? So all of these things right there, I was just used to writing. And I started writing a book. But when I ran into Chris, I was doing an 11-year sentence. I was near the end of it. And I didn't buy into what he was selling. I bought into him.
Okay.
Yeah, he walked into a maximum security prison and started laying down the law. And I was like, that's kind of gangster for this little white dude, right? It's like, first day, I ain't having none of this. I'm not having none of that. It's something that culturally that I was familiar with, right? Yeah. And his backstory about being a war correspondent, me growing up during the war on drugs, So I knew what it was like to grow up under a lot of pressure, but there were a lot of key points that he had. And in prison, it's like you get that head nod if you gangster, and he was gangster for lack of a better term. So I was like, all right, let's see what else he got. And then he started introducing these plays that were written about, the Black experience in a way in which we hadn't been able to tell the story. And then it was, I guess what the pitch is that, okay, here's an opportunity in a place that's essentially an opportunity desert to tell your story in a dramatic way where everyone will take notice to it. So he was like, he saw an opportunity to lift your voices up and be heard. And then he said, go back to wherever your quarters are and say what you want to say. And we began to write what we wanted to say. And he was the amplifier. He was the bullhorn. He was like, now let's make it loud. And that was Cage.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, both Chris and Boris. I know that I began to understand or get some understanding of your relationship during the workshops, because Cage didn't just start as a play at Patches Theater in Trenton. It was worked for at least 2 years before I got there. And then when I got there, I think I worked on it for about 4 months before we went into rehearsal, 4 to 6 months before we started rehearsing. And so I got a sense of your relationship, Chris and Boris, in the workshop, and it started making sense. But I have gotten questions from others who have been on the outside looking in. It's like, what is up with why does Boris like Chris so much? Or what, a lot of us who work in the entertainment industry are used to kind of, white folks with power kind of patting us on our heads and saying, well, you tap dance great. I'll place you in this show. I'll pay you this money and I'll make twice as much. Isn't that a great relationship? It can be very condescending. And I never, Chris, you have never, that I was never condescending to Boris or any of the other inmates while they were there or while they weren't there. And that's how you learn how to read people. What does Chris say about Boris when Boris isn't in the room? You know what I mean? And you were never condescending ever. You were never condescending to me. I walked in the room as a director. Everyone, it was like, all right, this guy's going to direct. And then I think, Chris, you were there for like the first day, and then I didn't see you again until tech. You were just like, and I'm like, I'm sending you pages, and you're like, no, I trust you. You're good. Do you? I don't want to get in the way. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to you. So you do your thing. I'll check in with you, and you would send 1 or 2 notes. 1 or 2 notes. Keep this in mind. Think about this. Check this with Boris, because I'm not sure that that's accurate. But for the most part, and so I really, really kind of dig the fact that, Chris, your experience as a war correspondent, I grew up in the inner city in South Philly. So I know that it can have war zone qualities. It can also be a wonderful place to grow up. We had picnics and cookouts and parties and things like that. So it wasn't all horrible, but there was an explosive volatileness to the neighborhood that I grew up in. And so family and friends, who grew up during the crack epidemic of the 80s going into the 1990s and drive-bys and gangster rap, we talk about PTSD a lot. It's like, do you know that we all probably have PTSD? I was thinking about that. So the fact that your experience as a war correspondent was actually able to connect to Boris, who grew up in this environment. You're both 110% America. Your experiences are 100% American. And that's what brings you together. You see each other's humanity. And that humanity can then be reflected in the work that you do, both alone, but in the case of Cage, together. Okay, so Cage is the story of a young man named Omar. The character is loosely based on Omar's life. Omar lives with his family, his mother, Shireen. Did I get that right?
Shameen
with an M. Shameen, his father, Jimmy, his sister, Sharonda, and his younger brother,
Quan.
Quan, Q-U-A-N, Quan. And Quan wants to be a bowler. That's where and I don't remember the baller story. He was going to be a baller because I was like, why is he a bowler? And as the director, I'm like, you never hear about young black people wanting to bowl. So I'm on board. I might have just accepted it. Like, fine, he wants to bowl. Black kids, there's got to be some black kid that likes to bowl. So Omar lives at home, and so Omar is a character who we meet. He has a young child, Zaire. That the kid Zaire, his kid, who we only get to meet as a small child in the beginning of the play. Omar, we know, is an ex-convict who's trying to get his life back together. However, he keeps running into walls with the bureaucracy of what it means to be an ex-con. And this is what a lot of folks who have not been sucked into the prison industrial complex don't realize. Once you get out of jail, it's not like you're good. There are all these rules, both written and unwritten, that block opportunities to rebuild your life at a time when you need it the most. And so Omar at the beginning we see him wrestling and, trying to, he's bringing his brother into the drug game because they've got to make money, and he's worked at this job, he's worked at that job. They found out that he had a record because he didn't check that box. That's beginning to change now, where you don't longer have to disclose whether or not you've gone to jail, but it's still a reality that many people are and have dealt with. We trying to get his life back together. We see him not be successful at that because of what he's up against, and so he gets pulled back into the system. And so the beauty of Caged, and one of the reasons why I liked it, I told Ryan, who is the artistic director of Passage Theater in Trenton, New Jersey, when I read the first act, I was kind of like, okay, it's a family drama. There might be something here. And when I read the second act, I looked at my husband and I went, I'm going to Trenton. Because the second act expands. Not only do you get a sense of Omar's experience in jail, which in my mind, as an African-American male trying to be aware of my privilege and what that means, most of the stories that take place in the African-American community still revolve around men. The single male character, and Omar is the protagonist of this play. So what does this play have to offer that's new? The new thing that this play had to offer is that the play didn't stop with Omar's experience. It showed how when one member of when you're in a family structure where everyone is needed, everyone has to pitch in order to survive. When one person is taken out of that system, it throws everybody off. You saw how Omar's prison term affected his mom, his dad, and his siblings, and his child in very real ways. So it wasn't like the family disappeared after the end. We went back and forth, and it almost did become cinematic. I do think that I was like, this is for HBO or Showtime, because it does live on stage. The stage has that immediacy. And you're in that room, and the feeling is visceral. But in terms of how the story is told, there's so many chapters. We watch Sharonda, the sister, get pulled into the system a different way, right? We watch, she had tickets that she hadn't paid off, and so a warrant's taken out, and so she gets pulled into the system. Well, one of the reasons why she wasn't able to pay those tickets is because she no longer had the money that Omar was bringing in with what he was doing, and so you see her trying to struggle with that. You see the younger brother who Omar pulled into the drug game be taken out by the drug game. And one of the things that Omar has to deal with in the second act is not only the fact that his mom is dying, and that's very real. His mom's sick, and she's always been the light of the family. So he not only loses his mom, but he also loses his younger brother. And he's dealing with the guilt of not only being there for his mom, but also being aware that he's the one who brought his brother into the occupation that would eventually kill him. So Omar, consequences of life choices that he made, and he takes responsibility for those, but he's also aware of the things that he was pushing against. It's very complex, it's very complicated, and it's a version of humanity in the African-American community when it comes to prison and how prison operates that I had never seen before. And that's powerful. That's worth leaving Chicago for a couple weeks to go play with Trenton, to go play in Trenton. And so so that's what Caged is about. And it ends with Omar making his way. So he gets through his second prison term and he makes his way back into society. And that's kind of where it ends. And at the end, I did a thing where I tied, Omar getting out to Jimmy, kind of being out, the father, Jimmy, dealt with drugs. And, you know, he had a situation where he was kind of chained to addiction. So anyway, that's the play Caged. We have roughly 10 to 15 more minutes. So now that I've set the play up, I really want to dive into what that experience was like once the play was up. And I'm going to start, if it's okay, Chris, I'm going to start with Boris, because Chris took a step back. Once we got the play on its feet, he was there for the workshops in New York. And thank you again, Chris and Boris, for bringing me into the process, because before that, I had never workshopped a play in New York. So, you know, I got in New Jersey every morning and go to Penn Station and walk with my director bag, you know. I was on cloud 9 for that week. So thank you for the experience. But Boris, as someone who had never performed formally before, and someone who had written, but definitely not on this level, what was it like for you to watch? Like, you were there at the beginning of this, you know, when you're still in prison. Now you're out, you're getting your degree from Rutgers. I'm so proud of you. You're great. You know, what was it like to watch actors, Broadway actors, off-Broadway actors, come to this place for a week and work out your play with a director from Chicago? That's like, you know, this young Black director who's going to come. What was it like for you to witness that coming together?
For the most part, the directing was what was really new to me. And to see you take the play and sort of put your own twist on it, like splitting those scenes up when they was arguing. I mean, that was amazing. Something I actually never seen. The acting is sort of, it's natural, because the thing is that in an urban space where you don't have access to a lot of entertainment, everybody's a comedian. Everybody's an actor at every cookout. I mean, you got some of the top-notch comedians just replaying events that happen in the family that makes them easier to digest later. But to be directed in a way in which we're going to turn this into something dramatic and also somewhat didactic, that was different. That was different for me. To pull out, what does this story mean? What are we saying? What story are we telling? You know, because it became more than just recalling some events in your life. This was a story that was able to bring humanity back to individuals whose humanity had been taken away. And I thought that, you know, having a director like such as yourself there to be able to help to pull that out was something that I had never actually seen. But the acting part was that was pretty much the easy part. The thing is that with some of the actors who had not been culturally aware of life below the poverty line, it was surprising to see that, you know, maybe some didn't know the difference between a person who's addicted to cocaine and a person who's addicted to heroin, a person who's an alcoholic, and a person who's simply just homeless. And when someone comes to your car and shakes the can and asks for money, an individual who grew up in that space makes that assessment, because we want to know what we're contributing to. You know, when someone says, could you please give me $5? I'm hungry. You make a quick assessment and say, am I contributing to this guy's addiction, or am I feeding a homeless person? So it's something that I could see, that I realized some of the actors, you know, who hadn't grown up in that environment didn't readily understand. So it was cool to sort of direct them in a way in terms of explaining some of the behaviors of these different characters.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite statements, and I only had to say it about 2 or 3 times, but because Boris was an actor in the play and he was one of the writers, and he's in a lot of ways our dramaturg, because no one else on the project had been to jail, had been to prison. So Boris can speak from experience. So I remember you had about 3 jobs on the project, and we would rehearse a scene with other people. And then I go, oh, you're all done for the day. And Boris would go, oh, great, I'm done for the day. And I'm like, you're not done. You're here for the rehearsal, man. Because if you're not an actor, you're letting us know what looks right, what doesn't look right. You're letting us know what's not real. But I will say one other quick thing. One of my favorite conversations, and I said I would bring this up the other day. we were talking about a character, I forget the character's name, but he is kind of like a street guy, very low bar drug dealer, but more of a drug user. And the character Omar, the gentleman who is the drug user he's the testimony that ends up putting Omar back in jail the second time. You only see the character once for a very short amount of time. And so coming to this play with my awareness, even though I grew up in the hood, even though I've dodged bullets before, I had never had that experience. So I'm thinking with my theater brain, this character you see once, you don't see the character long, you don't need that character. I cut the character. And so Boris, you and I are speaking on the phone, and you say, no, you got to put that character back in. And I'm like, Boris, you know. I'm giving all the theatrical reasons as to why the moment won't work. And you're like, no, the system cannot function without people like that.
That's right.
These officers lean on people that they know they can lean on to get the information that they need, whether it's accurate or not. In some cases, is irrelevant. They need those testimonies in order to get those warrants, in order to get people that they're trying to get in jail. And some police will do whatever they need to and lean on whoever they need to. So it's not just one moment with one character you see. It's literally the play that we're talking about. And my mind is like, I never,
Absolutely.
Never, ever forgot that. Great. So we have a few minutes left. So I want to speak a little bit briefly about how you've been moving forward with the idea of using art for prison reform, or just yourself, Boris, for prison reform. We have, about 5 to 7 more minutes. So just speak a little bit about what you've been doing since Caged and now, and you look amazing. So I'm imagining you're doing something fantastic today.
Yeah. Well, I went on to be I'm a community organizer for the Industrial Areas Foundation. So I get an opportunity to work on some of those issues that
Sorry,
plague the
real quick,
community.
where are you geographically? Where are you doing that?
I'm in Jersey City.
Okay, thank you. All right, please continue.
Yeah, so we work on jobs, we work on criminal justice issues, we work on housing. We were instrumental in getting mandatory minimums to where they are now. As of now, there won't be any mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug cases. Got everyone tested for COVID inside the prison system. Over 57 million put back into the school system, fully funded schools, just to name a few. And I'm also working on a new play called Love in the Time of Mass Incarceration. How does love survive under those pressures, with people being removed, coming back? And it sort of plays on the thing, Love in the Time of Cholera, which was written in the wartime. That's why I make reference to the war on drugs. Like, how can you foster a relationship under these conditions? But one of the biggest things is, I think if you think in terms of public safety, to give someone their humanity back is good for the public. To take someone and put them into a carceral space and to rip them of their humanity, it sort of makes a dangerous situation for everyone, right? Because and to give them education is a big deal. It's life changing, and it changes communities, it changes people. So I continue to do theater and work on things like social justice. I have another play I'm writing called 10 Sandwiches, where you have different individuals from different walks of life, everything from a cop to a judge to a criminal, and you put them in a cage, because this is how the bullpen works, where they'll slide a crate of sandwiches in there. And sometimes it's not enough sandwiches. And as individuals go digging through the crate to find enough sandwiches, you can watch the breakdown of this small society of people, right? Who just were talking and just were being very, very polite. But then once the resources start to run out. So in this play, I just reduce the sandwiches every day, and you'll watch the small society break down, because, what my concept is I can grow a ghetto faster than I can grow a garden. All you got to do is lock people into a space and take the resources out, and you'll see all those behavioral byproducts. So that's sort of what I'm into now. And I'm also an instructor for Teen Gateway, that getting youth ready for jobs and stuff. So
is that in Jersey City as well?
No, it's through Rutgers, so it's in Camden really, but we're on Zoom, so it's it's in my living room, and I'm also working on trauma informed classrooms as well when it comes to teaching inside the prisons.
All right, and you're a granddad.
6 times.
That's one of the reasons why we were having trouble getting in touch with you, is because small hands and feet were running around with your technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Chris, with the time that we have a few more minutes left, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the process after Caged. I remember the last time we spoke face to face was at the opening night of Caged. Then you teary and give you a hug. I gave your wife Eunice a hug. You were kind of like, all right, we're off to New York. Like, good work. Like, I remember like you being happy, and then it was kind of like that. So what has your journey been like since the ending of Caged? Are you still looking for opportunities to produce it? Are you still encouraging students to write plays now? Where do you go?
So I did, that was the only drama class I've taught. I teach humanities, so philosophy, history. I was teaching a course on inequality with the writer Matt Taibbi, and then COVID hit last spring. So we've all been locked out of the prison system because of COVID. Since then, the next course I'm teaching is on the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. I always teach something different. I wouldn't try and replicate that experience just because I don't think it's possible. The play, as you know, was published by Haymarket, and if you can see it, this is the cover of a book that's not out yet. It'll come out in the fall.
Look at that.
It's called Our Class, Trauma and Transformation in an American Prison. And it uses the process of writing the play. And of course, during that process, those emotional walls are ripped down to show the horror of mass incarceration. And as you, Jerrell, said, what it does not only to the individuals who are incarcerated, but what it does to their families and to their communities and to us. And I think it works. It's really the voices of my students. Boris is a star of the book, of course, but the voices of my students as they discuss their lives and shape it into a narrative that becomes Caged. But it's finished. Boris and I devoted probably hundreds of hours to that play. It's published. It's out there, and I think this is, this book, which will be out in the fall, is kind of my final integration with that process. I mean, this started in 2013. So, and my students are getting out.
Wow.
I mean, this is what's moving now after all these years, is finally students are getting out, and that's a whole other issue. I'll be in Patterson tomorrow with the mother of one of my students. So, because as you correctly pointed out, Jerrell, the obstacles, the roadblocks that are put up from them, is just horrendous. Boris is one of the huge success stories, but so many others through no fault of their own. I mean, we've got Kabir, by the way, has no place to live. He was fired from his job. He got a job at Whole Foods, but then they did a background check. It was nothing to do with his work. I mean, he was one of those people who should have never, he was listening to a 50 Cent song in a car, and he was 18, 2 older guys went in, did a robbery that went bad, and they killed the guy. He didn't have anything, didn't even know what was going on, but because he's in the car, he's charged. And his life is just unraveled. It's killing me. And so a lot of my energy now goes into just desperately doing what I can with very few resources to keep these amazing students of mine who I love and admire so much from sinking, but everything is slated against them. It's the cruelty of this system is beyond words.
Awesome. Thank you both so very much for taking the time to be with us here today. Chicago State University. I'm in Chicago. Boris, you're in New Jersey. Chris, you're in New York. And we all get a chance to meet up once again to talk about this. Also for our students and CMAT and just any other people listening, one of the things that I hope we were able to communicate is what it's like to come together with a group of people for whom you really believe that you did something special with. And so, none of us got rich working financially speaking, none of us got rich. In fact, some of us might have gave more money than we made back. However, I walk a little bit taller because I worked on that play. I have a little bit more of an inner glow and an awareness of how to share my light because of the time that I spent with both Chris and Boris working on this play that meant so much to me. Because even though I haven't been in the prison system, people in my family have, friends have. I told Boris I was 18. I went to college. My best friend went to jail. And that is a my story. So just thank you for taking the time to talk out. I'm going to give a little bit of an outro. On behalf of everyone at Chicago State University, I want to officially thank you, Chris. Thank you, Boris, for joining our panel today. Personally, I'm going to hold on to that feeling that I was just talking about a minute ago, of that feeling of what it feels like to be in communion and conversation with two individuals who I believe in and I believe believes in me, and the ability to create something together. So our next panel is going to be later on today. We'll put the information in the chat box window for the next event that's coming up and when that will begin. Remember, if you are a teacher applying to receive professional development credits for attending one of our 4 K-12 accredited panels, please use the link in the chat to receive more information, or go to csu.edu CMAT, and click on events. And to access the conference tomorrow, please use a new link that will appear in your email tomorrow morning. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Like I always say, you could have been anywhere and you came here to hang out with us. So we're aware of that and we're thankful. Boris, Chris, much love to both of you.
Okay, stay strong. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. Good seeing you, Chris. Good seeing you,
Okay, you
Jerrell.
too.